Captain Thunderbolt is the story of the Australian Bushranger Fred Ward, who escaped from jail to become a renegade outlaw who robs from wealthy squatters to give to the poor. The complete version of the film is missing, and a shortened 53-minute version appears to be the only surviving copy of the movie. Grant Taylor plays Fred Ward, and the 11-year-old Philip Hawkes played the bushranger as a boy. I spoke to Phil recently and asked him about his recollections of the film and how he was originally cast for the role of the young Captain Thunderbolt.
What happened was that my mother was the casting director of 2GB Macquarie at the time, right through the 50s, in the Jack Davey era and all of that. And I got to know the radio station and the radio personalities pretty well because as a school kid, I used to end up going to the station, which was in Phillip Street in Sydney, number 136 as I remember. I used to go in there after school and do my homework every day. And her office was a passing parade of all these radio actors, mainly doing their Celtics theatre, the Sunday night theatres, where we used to sit around and listen to the radio.
Did you meet these people?
Oh, yeah. I was, they were all my uncles, really. Oh, Ross Higgins was a guy I remember very well indeed. He was a sort of mentor for me. In fact, he got me involved in a cricket team that I played in when I was a kid. Well, Jack Davey, of course. My mother was one of the assistant producers on the Jack Davey show, so I got to go into the studio quite frequently and also on holidays with them, because they used to go big game fishing at Bermagui. So as a kid I was traipsing around, following all these people. Bob Dyer, of course, was there. I actually slept on his boat because there wasn't enough room in the house in Bermagui. Bob and Dolly. Keith Walsh. Oh, all kinds of names that I've probably forgotten, really. But one of them was Ray Barrett.
Was he around at the time?
Yeah, absolutely. I remember his craggy features.
Yeah.
But Bud Tingwall was a very young guy, as I remember. Bud, and I met him in the office. I'm not sure whether he was playing Superman or he was in one of those serials anyway. And the other thing we had in common was that he'd been away to the war, and he was in the Pathfinder Squadron just like my dad had been. So, there was a bit of common ground there. So to cut a long story short, when they were casting Captain Thunderbolt, they cast Bud Tingwall, and I kind of got the gig as playing him as a boy at about 10 or 11 years old. And the scene that I was in, well, there were a couple of scenes actually. The majority of the film was shot in the New England area, but the sequences I was in were shot in the Royal National Park, just south of Sydney. And there was a bunch of kids riding around on horses, bareback, pretending to be bushrangers, and that was one of the flashbacks in the movie where they were kind of playing bushrangers as kids and getting used to the idea, I think. Well, certainly Bud Tingwall, Captain Thunderbolt was. It was a lot of fun. The director was Kiwi, Cecil Holmes, I remember him very well. The cameraman was Ross Wood. Now, that's an interesting story, too, because Ross was probably the best-known cinematographer in Australia in those days. But later on, when I was actually working in Melbourne and then later in Hong Kong, I had a lot to do with Ross Wood Productions, which was the commercial company that he started up, and I was in advertising and he was doing TV commercials. So I had a lot to do with Ross over the years, and then his son, Ross Wood Jr. And the last time I saw those guys was when we did a shoot in Korea for Asiana Airlines, and at that time we recalled all these old days and how we'd met. That was with his son, Ross Wood Jr. So that is the sort of potted history of how I got involved, really, because I was fairly well known to all of these radio actors and producers and so on. Yeah, it was post-dubbed, post-synced, because we were yelling out at each other, and I forget what we were saying, but we were saying all those crazy things that kids say, like, you're dead. and things like that.
Yeah.
There was a little girl in that sequence too. I guess she was the young Joan. There were 4 or 5 of us, and we were just playing games, and so it set the scene for the later developments in the movie where they actually were antagonists. Grant Taylor played Fred Ward. Bud Tingle, of course, was a bushranger, so they were actually antagonists later on in the movie. It was a 2-day shoot over a weekend. I don't know how they managed that with Actors Equity rules about Sunday shooting, but I do remember, because there were kids involved, I think at that time, with children, it was quite difficult for kids to get permission to be away from school to do things like this. I might have been paid, some pocket money. I certainly don't have any receipts. It was a preview. It wasn't a public screening. It was a preview. That took place, I believe, from memory, in the old State Theatre in Sydney. I may be wrong about that, but I've got a sort of memory of going there for a film preview, and I think that was it. At 11 years old, I thought that was pretty cool, actually. And the funny thing is, when the movie was released and people got to see it, people at school found out about it, because I hadn't really told anybody, but it sort of became known around the school. I was at Canterbury Boys High. So, it became known in my class, and I remember one day, as a surprise, they made a presentation to me, and I went out the front of the class, and they'd wrapped up this thing in paper, and when I opened it, it was a gift, a bar of Lux soap, because the whole Lux advertising campaign at that time, they had Lux Theatre on 2GB Macquarie as well, but the campaign was based on something like Soap for the Stars, because Lux had all these celebrity endorsements from all kinds of American film stars. I forget who they were. People like Elizabeth Taylor and so on were all testimonials for Lux soap. So I got a bar of Lux soap from my classmates.
I asked Phil if he met Charles Tingwell and the other cast members during filming.
Well, I knew him pretty well anyway. And Grant Taylor, he was a pommy, wasn't he, Grant? Yeah, he was. Didn't really know him or get to know him very well. I don't think he did a lot of radio work, to be honest. Hart Maguire, look, all of these names, the major cast list, Hart Maguire, John Fegan, Rosemary Miller. I remember all those people en passant. They were all names and faces that passed by my mother's office when I was sitting there doing homework. And so it was, I remember the whole shoot was very much like a family picnic. And I remember particularly the catering. Now, catering on film sets these days is quite lavish, I think. Well, the catering that we had was pretty rudimentary. It was like packets of chips and soft drinks, and it was nothing very elaborate, even for the big stars. They didn't have their own caravans and tents and things like that, the sort of star celebrity treatment that people are probably used to these days. It was nothing like that. It was like a family picnic. It was all very relaxed and informal. I regret, out of the 2-day shooting, most of it ended up on the cutting room floor, because when I eventually saw the film, I thought, gee, well, that was pretty short for all that time and work that went into it. But that's pretty typical of movies, too. We had a couple of social visits later on after the shoot, after the preview. But no, they were all kids from different schools. Years later, in about 98, say 10 or 12 years ago, I was in Melbourne, and I rang up the National Film Archives, and lo and behold, they had a 35mm print. So they arranged a screening for me, and I went to their studio in South Melbourne with my family, actually, and we watched the movie. It was a lot of fun. It was a very scratchy, grainy print, but it was viewable, but it's not in good shape.